Welcome. So thanks for coming out to be with others and wade through the onslaught of the attacks that we're facing. It's very important. This event is organized by Speak Out Socialists. As socialists, we do not want to just have a say about how our society is organized, meaning that we come to an agreement with the rich and powerful about how we will serve them. Rather, our goal is a society of equals, and that cannot happen under capitalism. That type of social transformation would require a revolution by the vast majority of people to take power away from those with it today and reorganize society in the interests of the working and poor people of the world. We are active in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Baltimore, Maryland, and the Triangle, North Carolina, where we have in-person gatherings to watch and discuss the presentation today. Trump's attention-grabbing persona makes it easy to focus on him as the problem. He represents the interests of the billionaires, which we see very clearly from his administration. But behind him is a system that created him and brought him to the forefront. The problem is more insidious than an individual person and his 4-year term. The entire state, currently with Trump at the forefront, is organized for the interests of the class that profits off of and benefits from the exploitation and oppression of the majority of people. The Democratic Party plays the same role, to ensure that wealth is accumulated at the top and to manage the problems created by this system of violence and exploitation. Of course, they take a different approach, different rhetoric and methods, and that's not something to be dismissed as insignificant. The election of Trump is the ruling class's way of managing the many crises that they face. This current wave of attacks is meant to divide us and make us feel alone, powerless, and hopeless. As the showman that he is a master of spreading distractions and divisions and overwhelming us with the uncertainty and fear of the attacks that are meant to cause. The attacks we face are systemic, and there's no easy solutions. We have to come together to discuss what's happening and why, and what we can do to change our situation and the world. And we have to see what we're able to do right now. There's a lot that we can do to resist this. We can talk to each other, we can put up posters, bring people together to discuss. We can remind each other of how people organized before and learn lessons from those previous efforts. We can organize a banner drop over highways. We can attend ICE Watch trainings or go to meetings where other people who want to take action against these attacks are meeting. You can check back on our website for resources, posters, buttons, and articles. Even this presentation is going to be recorded and posted there. So in a couple of days, you could gather a group of people to watch it and come together for a discussion. As the resistance develops, we know that the Democratic Party politicians and spokespeople will try to get ahead of the efforts that we've made. They will assert themselves as the leadership. When this happens, we cannot accept it. They are part of the problem. They are the people who have refused to stand up to the right-wing advance in this country and have made amends to this around the world. When we look in the mirror, despite our doubts and feelings of isolation, we have to remind ourselves that we are capable of being the ones to take the first steps to organize a response. We invite speakers with expertise to present to us because this helps us all be better informed and better able to be active and engaged in confronting the problems that we face. The speakers that we host do not necessarily share all of our political perspective. Today, we're very fortunate to welcome Aviva Chomsky. Dr. Chomsky is a professor of history and coordinator of Latin American studies at Salem State University in Massachusetts. She's been active in Palestinian and Latin American solidarity and immigrant rights movements for several decades. She's the author of numerous books on the history of Latin America, the climate emergency, and immigrant rights. I would greatly recommend her book, They Take Our Jobs, and 20 Other Myths About Immigration. It's extremely useful in this political landscape that we're in. So with that, I'll hand it to Dr. Chomsky. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. This is an incredible audience. So I'm very impressed with how many people you have brought together here. So I do have a slideshow, so I'm going to share my screen and let you see an outline of what I'm talking about while I'm talking about it. Okay. Immigrant rights and the new Trump administration. And I think we're all kind of struggling right now with making sense of the current conjuncture because it feels very chaotic and a lot of things are happening very quickly. I was just talking with Jolene about this earlier, that I really think the chaos is part of the strategy, so that it's really important for us not to get caught up in the chaos and just being reactive to everything we see happening, but rather trying to see beyond the chaotic nature of the chaos to what's really going on behind it. Everyone can see the screen, right? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about 5 different things. One is the anti-immigrant narratives that are circulating in society. 2, what is Trump trying to do? 3, what I call the modern migration paradox, or perhaps the real causes of migration. 4, what could the US do? And 5, what can we do? So to start with anti-immigrant narratives that I think we're all, I mean, one thing that we are seeing happening is a huge rise in anti-immigrant narratives. And some of this comes from the far right and the MAGA movement and Trump himself. And yet at the same time, I would say that these anti-immigrant narratives have been promoted in less virulent and more subtle ways by every single administration, pretty much as far back as my lifetime, certainly as far back as the lifetimes of most of the people I see here in the audience. But I just kind of want to go through them and talk about why they are so deep-rooted and so appealing. And my argument is here at the bottom in capital letters that the narratives play on real problems, but they distort the causes. One is the national security narrative, that there's a crisis at the border, that there's a huge threat outside the border, that we inside the country are vulnerable to this sort of threat of outsiders and what their presence, and especially their crossing the border, is going to do to us. Clearly, there is a crisis at the border, but the crisis is the crisis being experienced by migrants at the border. There's really no crisis for the United States. National security, I think there are really deep-seated fears about national security that are very real and very important. One reason is the climate crisis that is, which is extremely threatening to all of us. And 2 is the sort of vast difference between the way the United States presents itself to its own population and the way the United States is seen outside of its borders. Now, of course, many people are trying to cross the border to reach the relative safety and security of the United States. But for most of the world, the United States is seen as the source of insecurity in their own countries. And that is that large-scale isolation of the United States, which is seen as a rogue actor by much of the world, is threatening to our national security as well. So I think that there are some real fears, valid fears, but the cause is not the migrants. Secondly, the concept of domestic security and criminalization, personal safety, and the idea that migrants are a threat, not just when they're outside trying to come in and in this sort of national security way, but that migrants are a threat when they're inside the country. And this is connected to a longstanding criminalization of immigrants that dates at least back to the Clinton administration, where immigration itself is criminalized and immigrants as people are seen as distinctly and uniquely as potentially criminal. Now, if you actually look at statistics, immigrants are one of the have some of the lowest levels of so-called criminality or lawbreaking of any group in the United States. And yet this domestic insecurity is also very real. And a lot of it is related to what's going on in our cities and the crumbling of our social safety networks and our society, and the despair, the widespread despair that leads to high levels of violence, and also the presence of guns, of course, in our society. That is, the United States is a dangerous society, but it's not because of immigrants. And this leads me to three different types of economic insecurity, which I think are also very prevalent in anti-immigrant narratives and anti-immigrant attitudes. The idea that immigrants are taking American jobs. Now, clearly, there has been huge job loss, especially of so-called good jobs, union jobs, protected jobs, jobs with decent wages and decent working conditions. So job loss and job insecurity is a real problem. But obviously the cause of that is not immigrants, it's capitalism. But very specifically, it's the drive to make more profits off the backs of workers, the drive to destroy unions, the drive to move jobs abroad to take advantage of lack of labor and environmental and tax and other protections. But the economic insecurity in the narrative we're hearing from our leaders is that immigrants are the cause of this. A second argument about economic insecurity is the idea that immigrants use public resources, that they're a drain on the public sector. Now, clearly the public sector is under attack, and people's ability to live securely with confidence in the public sector there is a lot of insecurity because of the neoliberal cutbacks in the public sector. But once again, immigrants use far less than their share of public resources because many public services they're not eligible for, others they're afraid to apply for. And again, if you look at the statistics, it's completely illogical, but it's a way of diverting our attention to what's really happening to the public sector is to put the blame on immigrants. And similarly, the idea that there's not enough housing and immigrants are taking housing, yes, there is clearly a housing crisis, but once again, the causes of it are much deeper. And to try to turn our attention to immigrants as the cause of the housing crisis is just a way of diverting attention from what's really going on in a privatized, neoliberal, deregulated capitalist housing system. So that was part one. Part two, what is Trump trying to do is to play on these very real economic and security fears almost as a diversion, and I would say as he is trying to implement his real agenda. And I don't really think that getting rid of immigrants has anything to do with his real agenda. I think it's almost entirely mass spectacle and appealing to his base and trying to divert the public's attention from the true economic agenda that he and his cohort are trying to put into place right now. So I would say that the mass spectacle, if you actually look at what's happened, clearly there's been an avalanche of executive orders. That's part of the mass spectacle. Many of them are not going to be implemented. They are being challenged. They're going to go through the courts. Some of them may be implemented in part, some of them not at all. Some of them may be implemented fully, but he's like just throwing everything against the wall to see what will stick, and a lot of it is not going to stick. But there's two real purposes in this mass spectacle. One is just creating terror in the immigrant community, and the second is throwing red meat to certain sectors of his bases who feel like, yes, he promised to do this, and now he's actually doing it. And this sort of machismo of I'm in charge and I'm actually getting this done. But if you actually look at what's happened over the past 2 weeks, to go beyond the executive orders, not much has happened. It's just been a lot more publicized than previously. So every single day, deportation flights have been taking immigrants back to different parts of Latin America under the Biden administration. But Trump just decided to do it as a spectacle instead of to do it quietly and underground. And part of the reason for using military aircraft was to turn it into a spectacle. And all of the people who have been deported since Trump took office are people who were detained under the Biden administration. So again, there's nothing really new in what he's doing. It's just the spectacle of it that's new. The same thing with detentions. The number of detentions in the past 2 weeks has gone up slightly, not that much. But what's really changed is the public attention that's being drawn to the detentions. That is, Biden was detaining people every day also, but he wasn't inviting Fox News to go along and create clips of ICE agents arresting people that could then be spread on social media and spread both terror and this impression that I'm really doing something. But some of the actual policy changes that Trump is trying to or threatening to do, and again, part of this is part of the spectacle. One is to close off many avenues to legal immigration. And, there's this sort of constant refrain, well, I'm not against immigration, I'm just against illegal immigration. But clearly what Trump is trying to do is to make much more migration, to illegalize much more of migration and to make it much harder to immigrate legally. Now, it's already very hard to immigrate legally, but there are some paths. And a lot of the steps that he's taken over the past couple of weeks have been to just shut down one after another those paths. One of the things that he just did, was it today or yesterday, was to announce that he's rescinding the extension of TPS, temporary protected status, which is a legal status that Biden had extended for Venezuelans. So this is going to create a population of about 300,000 people, immigrants who currently have a legal status. Is going to remove their legal status, but they're also going to be really easy to deport, because in order to obtain TPS, you have to turn all your information over to the to the Department of Homeland Security. So again, he's trying to get at low-hanging fruit in order to say, look at what a big deal I am. Look at all the big things I'm doing. So ending legal statuses like TPS, like the Biden's parole program, even student visas he's trying to attack. Militarize the border, mass deportation, or at least claims of mass deportation. Again, this is not going to be anywhere near as easy as that is, there's no way that 11 million undocumented people can be deported. Making new people undocumented to make them easier to deport is part of it. But there are still processes that have to be gone through. Even pretty much our detention system is full. So now he's talking about opening up Guantanamo. Even Guantanamo is going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to figure out how to send thousands or millions of people there. Expanding what's known, the different things that turn immigrants into criminals to make them a higher priority for deportation. But again, the biggest thing that's changed is the Lake and Riley bill that President Trump signed last week. But this has been going on, and Trump has supported it, but this has been going through the Senate and the House of Representatives, again, well before Trump took office. And under the Biden administration, and was approved, voted for by many Democrats. Only a few people were willing to stand up to it. And one of the things that the Lake and Riley Act does is expands what the concept of criminal means for immigrants. You only have to be accused of a crime to then fall into the category of a criminal immigrant. You don't have to be convicted. And in some ways, one of the biggest things that he claims to be trying to do is to end birthright citizenship. And here I have to say that if you had asked me a month ago, I would have just said simply, there's no way. He's just talking. There's no way. Birthright citizenship is in the Constitution. It's in the 14th Amendment. A president can't do that, no matter how much he wants to. However, looking at and obviously he has stated this as an executive order. It's already been challenged, and it's going to take a long time to go through the courts. But if this ends up before the Supreme Court, it is conceivable that this Supreme Court would argue for an interpretation of the 14th Amendment that allows Trump to do this. And this would create a large population of stateless people in the United States. So the modern migration paradox. What is really going on with migration underneath all of this blather that we're hearing? Both the United States and the European countries and the migrant sending countries, that's more than both, all are extremely tied up and dependent on the migrations that are going on today. And there's a very clear direction in these migrations. They're going out of the former colonies of the US and Europe, and they're going into the US and Europe, the former colonial powers. And this has been since World War II, the modern system of migration. And it's been exacerbated since the 1990s, 1980s, 1990s, in the neoliberal era by interrelated economic developments in both the former colonies and the former colonial powers. So I'm going to talk about those for just a moment. On the former colonies, international financial institutions controlled by the former colonial powers have been imposing the neoliberal model, especially through debt and structural adjustment. That is, third world, former colonial governments are saddled with huge debts towards these institutions, which means that they have completely lost their economic sovereignty. And the international financial institutions are implementing domestic economic policies in these countries, which came to the fore in the 1990s under the phrase of structural adjustment. These structural adjustment policies have called for austerity, called for huge cutbacks in social services, and the privileging of foreign investors with the rationale that this will help countries to pay back their debts. So that countries that previously were doing okay are being deliberately underdeveloped by debt and structural adjustment. At the same time, neoliberal restructuring in the United States has greatly increased the demand for exploitable labor in a number of different sectors. One is the de-unionized sector. That is, many longstanding unionized industries have moved out of the United States, but some longstanding unionized industries can't move out of the United States. And instead, what they've done is move out of highly unionized areas, primarily urban areas, and moved into places, say, in the rural South or rural Midwest, where they can quietly bring in immigrant workers at half the price, and as if they're creating their little third worlds inside the United States. So they can be paying people under the table, they can be taking advantage of workers' vulnerability, and the meat industry and the textile industry are two examples of this, where formerly unionized sectors have moved into non-union areas and then brought third world, primarily Latin American, but not only Latin American workers there. Another sector where there's a huge demand for exploitable labor is in new sectors of the service sector, new highly exploited gig workers, Amazon delivery people, Uber and Lyft drivers, group care facilities, elder care, fast food, food processing, new sectors that really didn't exist before World War II, but that have come to predominate in the economy, especially in the neoliberal era, as workers and families become more and more squeezed and in need of things like processed fast food and childcare and things like that. The undermining of subsistence in the migrant sending countries, that is, deliberate foreign policies favoring foreign investment that displace subsistence workers, peasants, and push them into the migrant stream to make room for extractive industries, palm oil plantations, tourism, and other foreign-owned industries that are extremely profitable and that must be invited in under the structural adjustment programs, which also require governments to stop protecting their own workers and their own peasants and their own environment. To fill these gaps created by the destruction of the public sector, there's been a flood of NGOs into non-governmental organizations into Latin America. And many of those have actually contributed to a system where they make loans, microloans to poor people. And those people, the only way they can see of using those microloans to improve their family's situation is to pool them to send somebody to the United States. So many of the very disorganized aid programs created by large and small NGOs actually create this trap of debt that forces people to send more and more family members to the United States. And yet, at the same time, migration serves as a safety valve for, say, Central American countries that allow these neoliberal systems, profitable systems, to maintain themselves. And I'm just going to jump down here to point out that remittances are the largest source of foreign aid in many poor countries. But remittances as a development strategy simply spurs further migration. The illegalizing of immigration creates huge new opportunities for profit through gangs, through smugglers, through drug trafficking. The very illegalizing of immigration has turned it into another big business, very profitable big business outside the law, and it's made it extremely dangerous and much more expensive. Outmigration frees land for the very kind of economic development that the colonial powers are instituting. And finally, the climate crisis, which of course is caused by overconsumption in the industrialized countries, in the former colonial powers, is contributing to pushing people off the land and into the migrant stream. So this is the modern migration paradox, that Europe and the United States complain about migration, and yet it's the very economic policies that they have imposed on the third world, along with the needs for labor that their domestic policies have created. That is, and this is the other reason why there's no way Trump is going to deport 11 million undocumented people, because the US economy is totally dependent on this paradox. So what could the United States do to change this larger system? And the system needs to change because migrants are being exploited in their home countries, and they're being exploited through the process of migration, and they're being exploited once they're in the United States. And it's very important to keep in mind that not only do migrants is it important to defend the human rights of migrants in the United States or wherever they are, but that migrants also have the right to stay home. And the United States policies are also undermining the right of migrants to stay home. So what could the United States do? End sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela. Reform the trade rules that work so to the detriment of the ability of the governments of poor countries, third world governments, to actually protect their own populations. Cancel the debts. Open the border. Legalize work and raise the minimum wage, which would enable migrants to send home remittances that would actually be able to be used to alleviate some of the economic crises in their home countries. End fossil fuel use. Agree to pay what the entire third world has been demanding at every single climate conference, loss and damages to the countries that are being damaged by our economy here and the European economies. Halt military aid to Israel. I just had to put that one in there. So this is my last slide. I can see I'm filling up my time. What can we do? First of all, I would say don't do the administration's job for it. That is, if the administration is trying to create terror, let's not contribute to that. There's been a lot of rumors circulating on social media and even in the mainstream media that I think are, oh, there's an ICE van at this supermarket. Well, actually there wasn't, but just like increasing the level of terror. So let's make sure we know what we're talking about before we talk about it. Educate, I think, is really crucial. That is to change these narratives that are what allows Trump to use immigration as such a kind of wedge issue. There's a lot of education that is necessary. Pressure elected representatives, pressure institutions, workplaces, schools, religious institutions, pressure local governments, towns, cities, states, collaborate with immigrant rights organizations, legislation, worker centers, collaborate with immigrant aid organizations, ESL classes, translation, shelter, food, collaborate with legal aid organizations, which have just been swamped over the past several weeks with immigrants seeking information and legal aid. And I end here by saying, do everything all at once forever. That is, let's not be trapped in the idea that, oh, things just suddenly got really bad. I think turning our attention away from what was going on with immigration under the Biden administration was a big mistake. And we have to realize that whatever happens in the next 4 years and after the next 4 years, this crisis is not going to go away, and we need to be in it for the long haul. And I just put 2 books here. The Revolution Will Not Be Litigated and The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, not because I don't think that litigation and nonprofits are important, and maybe that's where some of the people in this room want to find their niche to work in, but because there's no one path to follow. And that's why I say do everything all at once forever.